Well, in a lengthy media conference, the Prime Minister has admitted his government has had a ragged week and that cuts to the ABC and SBS were at odds with what he said prior to the election. Tony Abbott took questions from the press gallery for 45 minutes, saying he wanted to address head-on some of the recent criticism aimed at the coalition. The Prime Minister was asked a range of questions about defence pay, the GP co-payment and how his office was performing.
I really do think that this has been a year of very substantial achievement. I know that appearances do count, and I concede that the appearance last week was a bit ragged. Sometimes the public see the soap opera, they don't see the substance, but I think we're getting our message across clearly, and I think that over time the public will respond more appreciatively than they seem to be now. I accept that what we're doing with the ABC is at odds with what I said immediately prior to the election, but things have moved on. Gee whiz, there's a lot of questions coming out in a very short space of time here. There are some things which are going to have a lot of difficulty in the Senate. We stand by them. We absolutely stand by them. But if Plan A is in trouble, obviously you contemplate a potential Plan B. In the end, nothing matters more than performance, and this is a government which has a very solid year of performance under its belt.
Sarah, this used to be a bit of a tactic employed by John Howard when he was Prime Minister. If he'd had a tough time, he'd call the all-in press conference, he'd try and reset the political agenda. Didn't work for Tony Abbott today. Did he have anything to reset?
Well, I don't think you reset a government by going out and talking to the media. You talk about reset, you're talking about what people have been calling for, a serious reshuffle of the front bench. It's not, you can't go on a charm offensive and reset the government in an hour, even though I'm sure it felt like an extremely long hour for him. But, you know, full credit to any Prime Minister or politician, I say, who goes to front up the media. We don't always see it. It's easier to blame the media for all your woes, and you could see when he was saying, I'm getting a lot of questions, that's what he was thinking. Well, you just leave me alone. But to his credit, he didn't say that. And I think when you've had the sort of week, most of us would probably use language that's a bit stronger than ragged week.
Yes.
But when you've had a week like that, really the best thing you can do is go out and face your critics front on.
Tim, some of those critics have been Conservative commentators. Will what the Prime Minister did do today at that press conference help placate that criticism?
Well, I don't think it will in itself, because it's not individual events that matter, it's patterns of behaviour that matter, because that's what informs perception, attitudes and shapes perceptions and attitudes. Today we had an event where the Prime Minister levelled with the Australian public and with journalists, and I think that's an extremely welcome thing. He needs to make that a part of a pattern of behaviour, of being very honest and levelling with the Australian public about the challenges we face. And part of that means explaining to the public just how bad and dire the budget situation is. Now, a lot of it obviously was inherited by the previous government. Some of it is related to what has been done since there's been a change of government. But at every step, there needs to be an explanation about the fact that now the budget is tens of billions of dollars in deficit every year, debt is racking up at an incredible rate, and that this is unsustainable. People won't buy your solutions, no matter how well you communicate them, unless they see and understand that there is a problem. And that has not been what the government has levelled with people enough.
Peter, what did you think of the press conference today?
If you go through the transcript, I didn't watch it, I read the transcript afterwards, it seems like there's this plan to clear the barnacles. So they put the government up in dry dock, but none of the barnacles seem to have been taken off today. You've got the Medicare co-payment still sitting there on the hull. The defence dispute, there is still a dispute around pay, although there were some concessions around entitlements. Ditto the higher education, the big agenda item there, deregulation fees, is still on the agenda. And then he admitted finally that he'd lied on the ABC. So, you know, in a way, I think today had the appearance of a reset. Pretty close, we'll get there. But there was this sense that he was trying to sort of say, OK, let's start from here. But I don't think he actually brought many of the issues that are causing problems to an end.
Sarah, he was also forced to defend his own office today in relation to the stuff up around the co-payment and whether it was abandoned or not. What did you think of that?
I personally find it staggering that he had to defend his office. Obviously, what people are trying to do here, his critics, internal and external, are trying to draw a parallel to Kevin Rudd. His office micromanaged, they were notoriously controlling, and obviously that was a big part of what actually led to his decline, because he completely lost the goodwill and cooperation of his front bench. I think to assert that Tony Abbott is in immediate danger of that is stretching it too far. What I think this is actually about is Peta Credlin, his Chief of Staff. And she has an incredibly high profile among the Australian public for someone whose role is actually behind the scenes. And, you know, I said from the outset, I think Australia had issues with its first female Prime Minister. I think the average Australian has issues with their first female Chief of Staff. Yes, I do. I just think a lot of what the background is going on is really just dog whistling that, my gosh, there might only be one woman in cabinet, but they're all having to sing to the tune of his Chief of Staff, and she's a woman. I really think that's what's going on here, and I think it's really ugly, and I think it's ridiculous that he had to defend his office today.
Tim, I wanted to ask you about the Prime Minister's comments today about the cuts to the ABC and SBS. He said that, he didn't say it was a broken promise, but he did say, he admitted it was at odds with what he said prior to the last election. Should he have come out and said that earlier, do you think?
Well, I think, and I've said this already, he should be level with the Australian public about the challenges the government faces so that people understand there's a problem and a solution. I'd hate to break it to you, Steve, but ABC journalists are not a protected group that deserves protection from government above anybody else. The practical reality is that there needs to be significant savings in the government across the board, and that includes even the Human Rights Commission, which has taken a haircut during the last budget. So the question is, how do you explain that to the public? And part of that has to be to communicate the sense of necessity for doing so and levelling with the public about why it's essential, why it's necessary, because people won't buy a solution if you cannot explain the problem and they understand the problem.
Pete, your thoughts on that one?
Fair enough, Tim, but that wasn't what the Prime Minister was talking about today. He was not talking about the debt as eloquently as you. The other point, though, is this. Tony Abbott's justification today, and I will quote it, is things have moved on, circumstances are different. And when I heard that, something was ringing in my ears saying, I've heard that line before. When Julia Gillard changed her position on the carbon tax back when she was doing the deal with the Greens, her lines was, yes, I did say that, and circumstances have changed. Guess what? They're both right. But Tony Abbott has sort of created the standard by relentlessly going after Julia Gillard for her statement that situations had changed, which they had with a hung parliament. And it is very, very hard for him to now justify that position just because his budget position has changed.
There is a very substantial difference, and the substantial difference is this. One was directly related to what the former Prime Minister did in terms of political deals, particularly with the Greens. This is with relation to the budget, which is related primarily to the price of minerals, and the market decides that price. Sorry?
You don't even believe that.
Well, what do you mean? You're suggesting the price of minerals in the marketplace hasn't fluctuated? Just about every single bit of economic analysis will tell you
But
you're
Tony
wrong.
Abbott created a straitjacket for himself on trust. His pitch to the electorate was just as much about trusting what I say as what he was going to do.
Peter, this is precisely why I've said at every step. He should level with the Australian public about just how bad the situation is that he has inherited, what they need to do to correct it, because people need to understand how bad it is and the problem so that they will accept and buy the solution.
All right, well, for more on the Prime Minister's ragged week, you can head to the Drum website to read an article from Darren Barnett, former Press Secretary to Prime Minister Julia Gillard.